these are a series of conversations that offer valuable resources from the Creighton University to the community at large. They are sponsored by Dr. Todd Salzman, who is back there. He also functions as the cameraman, but he is the Amelia and Emil Graff Professor of Catholic Theology Chair at Creighton University. And these are hosted by St. Pius X and our Catholic Social Teaching Group. So if you want to be involved in planning or hosting, please sign up, or you can email Colleen Sisula. You can find her email on our website. She is our Director of Religious Ed. And where are you, Colleen? So people know. Oh, she's way in the back. So if you have any questions, you can talk to either Colleen or myself. So going forward, in December, we're going to have a panel discussion with 3 researchers from Creighton who did some research around the survivors of clergy sexual abuse here at a local school. And the presenters are Dr. Julia Fetter, Dr. Heather Fryer, and then Dr. Rebecca Murray. So if you're interested in that presentation, please come join us on December 5th. I'm not sure if it'll be here in the church or if it will be over in our parish center, but we'll make sure that information is out for you. And then the next one after that is in February. That will also be a panel discussion. We're gonna watch a short film, and then we're gonna talk about parent caregivers. So we have a lot of parents who are either taking care of their parents, or they have children who have disabilities, and those folks are kind of left behind, and there's not a lot of services for them, and so we're going to have a discussion about that. So now I get to introduce our speaker, who is my sister. Sorry, we all cry. Anyway, Barb Rezac is the Vice President of Advancement and Mission at Mount Marty University in South Dakota. And she's going to introduce one of the Benedictine sisters who is here with us tonight. I will let her introduce her, but she is here to talk to us about the rule of St. Benedict and how that applies to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our Catholic social principles and the common good. So I'm going to go put her slides up and let her introduce the sister.
Do you want me to use that?
Oh, you're not going to use it.
I'm going to grab that one right here. All right. Thank you, Cindy. And I do want to introduce, we do have a sister here from Sacred Heart Monastery. She actually is stationed at Mount Michael here in Omaha, or Elkhorn. So Sister Carol Jean, will you raise your hand? Thank you. It's just awesome that she's here tonight. And thank you all of you for coming out tonight for this presentation. This all started with, I'm in a PhD program through the University of Nebraska, and I took a course on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as I was looking at the syllabus, I thought, gosh, this is the rule of St. Benedict, and so I asked if I could take an independent study so I could connect the two on a little bit deeper level, and so they allowed me to do that. And so from that course and from that project that I did came this presentation. So, all right. So thank you for allowing me, Todd and Cindy and your committee, to be here tonight. Studying the nature of God and religious belief is a wonderful way to grow in our faith. The more I study, the more I realize that I don't know, and the more the mystery of the body of Christ intrigues me. I've come this evening to discuss Benedictine spirituality and how it relates to the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement and Catholic social teaching. So as Cindy mentioned, I'm her younger sister. I always have to say younger because she looks very young. I'm privileged to serve as the Vice President for Mission and Advancement at Mount Marty University, a Benedictine Catholic university in Yankton, South Dakota. I have served the university for 12 years. Prior to Mount Marty, I served as a teacher, principal, and development director for a total of 21 years at the Catholic schools and parishes in Yankton, South Dakota. I'm married to a farmer. We live west of Yankton, and we have 3 awesome daughters and a soon-to-be son-in-law. After spending a few years getting my feet wet at Mount Marty, I soon came to realize that in order to really represent the school and its mission, I needed to really know that mission. We are Catholic and we're Benedictine. I started a 3-year journey through the Diocese of Sioux Falls of studying the Catholic faith, from salvation history to the New Testament and church history, to all the councils and papal leadership and the catechism. I also asked to journey with the sisters in becoming an oblate of St. Benedict, with the sisters at Sacred Heart Monastery. I've deeply enjoyed this journey, connecting the dots and praying about the many nuances that I experience. There are about 20 plus Benedictine high schools in the United States and 12 Benedictine colleges and universities. Mount Michael here in Elkhorn is a Benedictine high school, and Mount Marty in Yankton is one of the 12 Benedictine colleges and universities. And just a quick background on Mount Marty, because I know there's some alumni here. Mount Marty is home to 950 undergraduate and graduate students. We have 3 sites. Our main site's in Yankton. We also have locations in Sioux Falls and Watertown. Our largest degree program is nursing. We have undergraduate nursing, graduate level nursing, and a Doctor of Nurse Anesthesia practice. Our next largest major is business, followed by education and exercise science. We have a beautiful main campus on the banks of the Missouri River, and we are sponsored by the Sisters of Sacred Heart Monastery, who also proudly sponsor the Avera Health System. So, before starting at the university 12 years ago, I knew little about St. Benedict. But I can say that this man and all the wonderful people who have kept this 1,500-year-old tradition alive have inspired me on a very deep level. As Timothy Fry notes, Benedict stressed the importance of the person and the relationship of persons living together. He respected the freedom of the person. For example, he said that the novice was free to leave at any time. The monk who left might be received back any number of times. Any restrictions were meant to amend faults and to safeguard love. He wanted the strong to have something to yearn for, and the weak, nothing to run from. Benedict found a humane approach based on the supernatural, that in all things, God would be glorified. Benedict lived 1,500 years ago, in the late 400s and early 500s. He is known as the father of Western monasticism for having established a rule that would become a norm for innumerable monks and nuns. He's the patron saint of Europe. As a young man, Benedict went to Rome to study literature and law. He was disgusted by the dissolute lifestyle he found there. The Roman Empire, which had allowed Christianity to be its national religion, had fallen. Religion and politics never really go together. He decided to become a hermit in a hillside cave east of Rome in Subiaco. For 3 years, he meditated and prayed about how to live as Christ had taught. Some shepherds nearby befriended him and began to follow his teachings, which is really how the first Benedictine order took root. He eventually founded several orders and then wrote the Rule of St. Benedict, which is right there. The Rule of Benedict is that small booklet. I say this book is small, but it's pretty mighty. In this rule, Benedict defines in 73 very short chapters how his monks will live together. Based largely on Scripture, he discusses how they will live in peace, helping one another flourish into who God made them to be. The rule contains 126 references to the Bible, with 71 of them coming from the Psalms in the Old Testament. Interestingly, the Psalms are the prayers that Jesus and the Jewish people would have prayed. And Benedict lays out in pretty clear detail how the Psalms would be prayed every day. His directions are the basis of the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Divine Office, that we pray every day. His directions, Benedict was defining a community based on the teaching and life of Jesus Christ. He knew there was a better way to live in a community as Christians than what he was seeing around him. We can allow this rule to transform us yet today. As Sister Joan Chittister, a Benedictine sister from Erie, Pennsylvania, so eloquently spoke at the very recent synodal event here in Rome, in the early church, to be a Christian community meant to defy Roman imperialism, to stretch Judaism, to counter pagan values with Christian ones. It demanded very concrete presence. It took great courage, unending fortitude, and very clear public posture. Discipleship meant the rejection of real things at the risk of the new. It meant the rejection of emperor worship, the forswearing of animal sacrifice, the inclusion of Gentiles, the elimination of dietary laws, the disavowal of circumcision, the acceptance of women, and the supplanting of law with love, of nationalism with universalism, of a chosen people with a global people. The following of Christ was not an excursion into philosophical argument. It was real and immediate and effective. Benedict's communities are built on pure Christianity. If anyone wanted to escape the corruption of Rome and live in one of Benedict's communities, he or she had a new way of living together in peace, the way of which was spelled out in the rule. They prayed 7 times a day. Benedict said that there was nothing more important than praying and reflecting God's desire for each of us. No one's work or even sleep was so important as to not be on time for prayer. He had rules for humility, a whole chapter in fact, organization, prayer, and the tools for good works, which are essentially the Beatitudes and Commandments, among other things, including eating and sleeping arrangements. Following this rule resulted in stable, peaceful communities. Benedict lived before the schism in the church and before the Reformation. So this rule would have been for all who declared themselves a Christian. The church was the church for all. Benedict's definition of living in a community according to biblical principles is one of the purest forms of Christianity, such as described by Sister Joan Chittister. The issues we all face today, especially the polarization of political and religious ideologies, were not much different than in Benedict's time. There were serious political and power divisions back then, just as there are today. I believe his wisdom in leaving that all behind is still very relevant today in bringing Christ to the world. And I will compare the issues we deal with in regard to Catholic social teaching and the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement to the rule of Saint Benedict. We will start with Catholic social teaching. As Catholics, as Christians, as Protestants, or however we identify ourselves, we can go down rabbit holes and try to simplify, redefine, pinpoint, and extrapolate the real issues. Benedict asks us to do just the opposite. He recommends we open our hearts wider and deeper, and that we listen more intently to the vulnerable and to those coming from a weakened place. As Dr. Sandy Cornish, a senior lecturer in the School of Theology at the Australian Catholic University, states, the more vulnerable a person is, the greater their moral claim on the hospitality of others. There are 7 Catholic social principles, and I will walk through them one at a time. The first is life and dignity of the human person. The Church teaches that every person is precious, from conception to natural death, that people, every single one of them, are more important than things, and that the measure of every institution is whether it threatens or enhances the life and dignity of the human person. I was really touched by a statue in the courtyard of St. Leo's University, a Benedictine university in Florida that I visited this summer. The statue depicted the monks recruiting Rudolph Antorka, the college's first black student, when the Jim Crow laws deemed it illegal to educate black and white students together. That took some fortitude and courage to truly represent what Christ taught and to believe in the dignity of Rudolph Antorka. It certainly flew in the face of our legal system, and was what St. Benedict discusses in chapter 4, the tool for good works. The rule references the Bible 126 times, so it is in this chapter where the commandments and beatitudes lie, and where lies many other ways of treating all people the same, or actually putting the other ahead of ourselves. The life and dignity of the human person is clearly noted in chapter 53, when Benedict suggests that all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. Chapter 70 says that we should not assume any power over those older or younger, but should value them all, regardless of age. And of course, chapter 72, when discussing good zeal, suggests that we should try to be the first to show respect to the other. The second social principle is call to family, community, and participation. The Church teaches that the person is not only sacred, but also social. How we organize our society, from economics, politics, law, and policy, directly impacts human dignity and the capacity of individuals to grow in community. The family is central, considered the domestic church, and must be strengthened. People have the right to participate in society, seeking the common good and well-being of all, especially the poor and vulnerable. Here we go back to chapter 4 and the tools for good works. Relieve the lot of the poor, hate the urgings of self-will. He ends the chapter by saying the workshop is the place to toil faithfully in the stability of the community. The sick are addressed in chapter 36, and the elderly and children are given special treatment in chapter 37. Benedict focuses on hospitality and charity throughout the rule, which lends well to the call to family, community, and participation. Rights and responsibilities is the third Catholic social principle. The Catholic tradition suggests that human dignity must be protected, and a healthy community can be achieved if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met. Every person has a fundamental right to life and a right to those things required for human decency. Along with these rights come the duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. Benedict built this into chapter 2 when discussing the qualities of the abbot. He suggests that everything the leader teaches and commands should, like the leaven of divine justice, permeate the minds of those in his care. More will be expected of those to whom more is given. Of course, the tools for good works in chapter 4 define taking care of the poor, sick, sorrowing, and troubled. Chapters 33 and 34 discuss the economy of the monastery, suggesting that all things are the common possession of all. None of us really own anything on this earth. It is our common home. Distribution was made to each as he had need. St. Benedict quotes the Acts of the Apostles here and suggests we should not treat others with favoritism when it comes to the goods of the world, but rather consider those with weakness. And chapters 36 and 37 suggest that taking care of the sick, the elderly, and the children is very important. Care of the sick ranks above all else with Benedict. Those with needs present the opportunity for our charity and love, and should be treated with kindly consideration. Benedict built this into the rule, which was the governing document for his monasteries. We too are invited to create governing documents that care for the rights and responsibilities of all. The fourth Catholic social principle is option for the poor and vulnerable. The Church teaches that a basic moral test is how our most vulnerable members are faring. There are deepening divisions between rich and poor, and our tradition instructs us to put the needs of the poor and vulnerable first. Benedict addresses this in chapter 4, where he specifically states from the Gospel of Matthew that you must relieve the lot of the poor, clothe the naked, visit the sick, and adds from the Beatitudes that we must bury the dead, go to help the troubled and console the sorrowing. Your way of acting must be different than the world's way, he says. I recently shared this document from which I'm reading with a good friend of mine from Yankton. His name is Bernie Hunoff, and he happens to be the owner and editor of South Dakota Magazine. He has met more people and told more stories than anyone I know. He shared with me a podcast of 2 young men in the North Dakota State Penitentiary. One prisoner was hosting the podcast, and the other was his guest. The guest on this particular podcast was a young Native American named David Lee from the Yankton Sioux tribe. He was put in adult prison at the age of 15 for repeatedly stealing cars and running away from an abusive situation at home. He was put in foster homes, abused again, and then sent back to his family, only to run away again when he couldn't take it anymore. In prison, his anger would get the best of him, and he ultimately ended up in administrative segregation with his arms and legs restrained to a bed for all but 15 minutes a day, when he was allowed to walk around for a bit so he wouldn't get blood clots in his legs. After he was released from ad seg, as he called it, he had a revelation that helping others would be his life's mission. For the past 10 years, he has helped others with mental illness and is one of the best and most helpful prisoners there today, still incarcerated at the age of 47. I think of this young man when I think of options for the poor and vulnerable. Was prison really the best place for this young man? Could we as a society have done better with the life and dignity of this poor and vulnerable teenager who really just needed to be removed from a horrible situation and allowed to grow up? The 5th social principle is maybe addressed the most in the Rule of St. Benedict. This principle is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Work is more than making a living. It is a form of continuing participation in God's creation. If the dignity of work is respected, then the rights of workers must be respected. The right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to joining unions, to private property, and to economic initiative. Benedict had quite a bit to say, as you can see here. The abbot, in chapter 2, is expressly called to make sure every monk is cared for, an example worthy for each of us in our own institutions when caring for our employees. The tools for good works in chapter 4 are relevant again, but especially in creating a stable environment where all are treated with respect and we all work toward the stability in which we can all thrive and flourish. The deans of the monastery in chapter 21 are asked to be virtuous, humble, and wise in their oversight, and are chosen to work with smaller numbers so that no one gets lost in the shuffle. Care of each individual is stressed by Benedict. Chapters 33 through 35 and 39 to 41 discuss the economy of the monastery and the quality and quantity of food. In Benedict's community, all things were shared for the benefit of all, and the distribution was made according to need. We are all here for a brief time to care for and give back all that we need and use. While we have homes, and we should be able to have the dignity to take care of our loved ones in a comfortable home, our earthly home is not ours. Are we using our work and our rights to give glory to God by treating all people and all things with respect? Benedict also suggests that all people who can work should work. In chapter 48, he defines ora et labora. For all of you who might be unfamiliar with Benedict, this is an iconic Latin saying attributed to him, which means work and prayer. Ora et labora. Work and prayer help us to avoid idleness, which is the enemy of the soul. It was important to Benedict that we live by the labor of our hands, in moderation and taking infirmities into account. Benedict wrote a chapter about clothing, expressing that it was important for his monks to be sufficiently clothed with items that fit size-wise and are conducive to the climate and location, using nothing that doesn't serve a need, and taking cost into consideration. The dignity of rights and workers should allow for them to take care of their personal needs with some sense of pride without overdoing it. In chapter 66, titled The Porter of the Monastery, Benedict suggests that the community should take care of all necessities for those within. And he ends the chapter saying, "This should be read often in community, so the monks all understand it." Chapters 69 to 70 addresses treating those within with respect, and that monks were not to champion one another or assume power over others. Many chapters in the rule help us understand the dignity of work and the rights of workers in Benedict's day. Solidarity, the sixth Catholic social principle, suggests that we are all one family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, and ideological differences. We are sisters and our brothers' keepers, wherever they may be. Loving our neighbor has global dimensions as our world gets smaller and smaller. At the heart of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. Pope Paul VI taught that if you want peace, you should work for justice. Our love for our sisters and brothers demands that we promote peace in a world surrounded by violence and conflict. We have had many tremendous examples in the Benedictine sisters and monks and the Society of Jesus and many others before us who worked to educate students from around the globe and send our Benedictine students overseas to volunteer and live with a multitude of cultures, learning and growing with them. The more that young people, because we should start there, learn that the majority of all people around the globe are just trying to flourish, the more peace and love we will all experience. Benedict addresses this loud and clear in chapter 4, the tools for good works. He states, "You must honor everyone and never do to another what you do not want done to yourself." Really just a second grade message. And I learned many years ago as a second grade teacher that we never really get beyond the power struggles of an 8-year-old. The final Catholic social principle is care for God's creation. We show our respect for the Creator when we take care of and steward all that He has given to us. This is a requirement of our faith. We are called to protect people and the planet, living our faith in relationship with all of God's creation. This has fundamental moral and ethical dilemmas we cannot ignore. Benedict teaches us to treat all things as if they are vessels of the altar in chapter 31. I often think of our Benedictine sisters who take care of every corner of every building, shining windows and cleaning corners. They recycle paper and envelopes and everything else that they can, reducing the amount of waste in the world. They garden and grow their own fruits and vegetables. They built buildings to last, using some of the best materials available. Chapter 32 goes on to say the abbot must appoint someone who can be confidently trusted to care for articles, make sure items are returned, and keep all things clean. Caring for all items is indeed caring for creation when we don't have to reorder, remake, rebuild, refurbish, or redo, when we choose to reduce, recycle, reuse, take care of our buildings and other things, and live in moderation. So I don't know if I should stop here for a minute. I'm going to move on to the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement. As I don't know if on Catholic social teaching, if anybody has any comments to share or wants to say anything about that or ask any questions. Keep on going. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, we can also look at the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement through the lens of St. Benedict. In chapter 20 of the Rule, we hear, "Only in this are we distinguished in His sight, if we are found better than others in good works and in humility. Therefore, the abbot is to show equal love to everyone and apply the same discipline to all according to their merits." These terms may all be new and defined in different ways than 1,500 years ago, or the time of Jesus, or even before that. But these same issues of inequality and injustice have been with us for a long time. Benedict addressed many of these issues in the Rule. And remember, too, that his Rule is based on the Bible, the culmination of the Old Testament and the New with the coming of Jesus. And there's 126 references to the Rule, to the Bible in this Rule. This strikes me every time I'm blessed to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, defined in chapters 9 through 19 of the Rule, which is based on the Psalms. Praying these Psalms multiple times a day, we pray about justice, kindness, pride, deceit, integrity, wickedness, and faithfulness. These Psalms aren't discussing white men or black women, Asians or Jewish people, gay people, pretty people, or poor people. The Psalms, written 1,000 years before Christ, suggested we are kind and just to one another, all of us. Benedict teaches us to avoid all favoritism in chapter 2. I think I might be on the wrong slide here. A man born free is not to be given a higher rank than a slave who becomes a monk. Think for a bit of where our society would be if we would have taken this to heart 1,500 years ago. In addition to the differences in race and gender, I often think of the disparity shown in the ever-growing sex trafficking and pornography industry when I read this verse. He goes on to say a couple verses later that because whether slave or free, we are all one in Christ. We distinguish ourselves as a Benedictine institution by treating every person with dignity, regardless of their position, rank, gender, ability, age, etc. As Benedict says in the very next chapter, in chapter 20, only in this are we distinguished in his sight, if we are found better than others in good works and humility. Therefore, the abbot is to show equal love to everyone and apply the same discipline to all, according to their merits. As I said earlier, I recently took a class called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion as part of my PhD program at the University of Nebraska. When learning about the issues and terms, I kept going back to Benedict and his stance on these issues 1,500 years ago. I found there are multiple DEI terms defined quite clearly by Benedict. Chapter 3.3 about inclusion, the word inclusion, in stating, the Lord often reveals what is better to the younger. And his rule addresses power in chapter 2, verse 4. Therefore, the abbot must never teach or decree or command anything that would deviate from the Lord's instructions. On the contrary, everything he teaches and commands should, like the leaven of divine justice, permeate the minds of his disciples. Chapter 2.9 goes on to say, then, like the prophet, he may say to the Lord, I have not hidden your justice in my heart. I have proclaimed your truth and your salvation. Benedict deals with privilege through chapter 7 on humility. Privilege is knowingly or unknowingly setting oneself above or over another. Humility, on the other hand, leads to reliance on God and not status, things, or others for greatness. Benedict starts chapter 7 by stating, brothers, divine scripture calls to us, saying, whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. In saying this, therefore, it shows us that every exaltation is a kind of pride, which the prophet indicates he has shunned, saying, Lord, my heart is not exalted, my eyes are not lifted up, and I have not walked in the ways of the great, nor gone after marvels beyond me. And why? If I had not a humble spirit, but were exalted instead, then you would treat me like a weaned child on its mother's lap. I'm going to repeat that. If I had not a humble spirit, but were exalted instead, then you would treat me like a weaned child on its mother's lap. He's comparing exalting ourselves with being disconnected from the source of sustenance. Privilege and power are definitely redefined by humility by St. Benedict. Appreciating each person and providing for their diverse skills and equity or inequity, and not holding an implicit bias toward anyone, is the justice Benedict proclaims. Benedict states in chapter 34, verses 1 through 5, "It is written, distribution was made to each one as he had need." By this, we do not imply that there should be favoritism, God forbid, but rather consideration for weaknesses. Whoever needs less should thank God and not be distressed, but whoever needs more should feel humble because of his weakness, not self-important because of the kindness shown him. In this way, all the members will be at peace. All members will be at peace when those who have more allow those who have less an equal seat at the table. Wouldn't that solve a few issues in our society? I'm taking a class right now studying about workforce development and how our economy would grow by $1 trillion if those who could learn were given the pathway to learn the skills necessary to fill the open positions. Many have the desire and ability, but don't have cars, or the money for education, or the support to achieve loftier goals. Dominant, privileged, and advantaged individuals are spoken of in chapter 2, verse 30, where we hear, "More will be expected of a man to whom more has been entrusted." And chapter 4, verses 14 to 19 of the rule addresses marginalized, oppressed, and disadvantaged people by stating, "You must relieve the lot of the poor, clothe the naked, visit the sick, and bury the dead. Go to help the troubled and console the sorrowing." In chapter 53, verse 15, Benedict states, "Great care and concern are to be shown in receiving poor people and pilgrims, because in them, more particularly, Christ is received. Our very awe of the rich guarantees them special respect." And in chapter 55, verse 20, Benedict states, "The abbot, however, must always bear in mind what is said in the Acts of the Apostles. Distribution was made to each one as he had need. In this way, the abbot will take into account the weaknesses of the needy, not the evil will of the envious. Yet in all his judgments, he must bear in mind God's retribution." Benedict warns against microaggression, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, by stating in chapter 4, verses 51 to 54, "Guard your lips from harmful or deceptive speech. Speak no foolish chatter, nothing just to provoke laughter." He also states in chapter 6, verse 4, and again in chapter 7, verse 56, which is the 9th step of humility, "In a flood of words, you will not avoid sin." And finally, I'm going to stop here and address what most believe is the elephant in the room, and that's the topic of LGBTQ. Benedict doesn't expressly address this because his rule was written for a monastery. He just mentions that all monks are to have their own beds. He does, however, start his rule with the words, "Listen carefully with the ear of your heart." There is a fabulous guideline that just came out this month from the Diocese of Davenport on the accompaniment of sexual and gender minorities. It's the most pastoral guideline written in recognizing differences in sexual orientation. I want to read the conclusion of this guideline. In summary, a Catholic pastoral approach accompanying people who experience differences in sexual orientation or gender discordance will show respect for the dignity of all people, acknowledge people in their difficult circumstances, listen for greater understanding, involve others in the decision-making process, and work with individuals, families, and caretakers on a case-by-case basis. As the church, we have a special responsibility to look out for the physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of those entrusted to our care. When working with people who experience differences in sexual orientation or gender discordance, we must strive to protect lives and souls from harm. Sister Rosie from our monastery in Yankton pointed this document out to me just yesterday. She said she had asked her prioress over the weekend how she thought the LGBTQ group should be treated, and her prioress threw the question right back at her, saying, "How do you think Jesus would treat them?" Rosie said without skipping a beat, Jesus would have gone out to find them. Oops, I missed that one. And finally, I challenge each of us here to think of Benedictine hospitality according to our social principles and our DEI initiatives, and that we start in our own institutions and homes to create peaceful, stable places where all people thrive in their God-given capabilities, gifts, and design, and where we pass on the wisdom of Benedict to a new generation. As Benedict says in his second last chapter, "Just as there is a wicked zeal of bitterness which separates from God and leads to hell, so there is a good zeal which separates from evil and leads to God and everlasting life. This, then, is the good zeal which monks must foster with fervent love. They should each try to be the first to show respect to the other, supporting with the greatest patience one another's weaknesses of body, of behavior, and earnestly competing in obedience to one another. No one is to pursue what he judges better for himself, but instead what he judges better for someone else. To their fellow monks, they show pure love of brothers. To God, loving fear. To their abbot, unfeigned and humble love. Let them prefer nothing whatever to Christ, and may he bring us all together to everlasting life." So that's all I have, but I wanted to mention that I'm an oblate with the Sisters of St. Benedict at Sacred Heart Monastery, and it's a journey that I took just to learn the rule and to try my hardest to live this in my place and time. I have a family. I can't pray with the sisters 4 or 5 times a day, but I can live this as best I can in my own life. And so it's an incredible journey. I know Cindy's looked at maybe getting a group in Omaha, and I know there's a group in Lincoln. Am I right, Sister Carol Jean? There is one at the Abbey in Elkhorn? There we go.
We don't need to start another one.
I do have some information in the back on that if you're interested in it, with the Sisters of Sacred Heart anyway. And then we also have copies of that document from the Diocese of Davenport, and there are a whole bunch of copies of this rule if you're interested in having one of those. So anyway, thank you for coming tonight, and yes, David.
As you so rightly stated early on in your experience of UNL and your program you're going through there, and the correlation of the rule of Benedict to what you're learning there, my question is, how many of the Catholic Benedictine universities, I thought you said there are 8 or 12?
It's 12.
12. Are involved in at least discussing this, or do you know if that's part of their discussion at least? Or
Discussing DEI in terms of this?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
In terms of what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I presented this at the Association of Benedictine Colleges and Universities this past summer down in Florida, and I would say it was kind of eye-opening for most people to see how that connected so well.
I would think so.
Abbot John from St. John's said he'd always thought it connected, but he had never seen it connected that way before. So he's asking me to publish this, but
Yeah.
anyway.
It's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and for really, really insightful thoughts and speech. I wonder, is it possible for us to get a copy of your what you were reading so I can go back and reread it, share it with my husband who didn't come tonight, and really ponder it some more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot. Everybody warns me, speak slow, because it's just a lot in there. And I've just gone through this so many times that for me it's like, I don't know. Anyway, absolutely. I can certainly make it available. Just have to give me your email address. So, of course. I actually have a copy
Any
here.
other questions? Oh, yes, it is being recorded, and we'll have this posted on our website. It'll be a few days before we get it on, but you will be able to see it there.
Can Barb send it to you, and then we can get it from you?
Yeah, you can, Barb can send it to me too, and then those of you who have my email here at Pius, it's Cindy J at St. Pius 10th Omaha, or if you have my home email, it's audiocindy@gmail. Yeah, we can get it. We can for sure get it to anyone who would like to have a copy of it. Any other questions from anybody or comments?
This one up here.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were behind me.
I just wondered if anybody was aware, this isn't a university, but Mount Michael, just west of here, has a program for Benedictine
For oblates.
oblates, yes.
Yeah, Brother August
Yeah.
just said that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, there's a couple of them back there that you can go talk to tonight.
Any other comments?
The beautiful thing about being an oblate is, and I don't know, I'm sure this is everywhere, but like the sisters at Sacred Heart Monastery are just so just encouraging. It's not like a checkbox thing that you have to do. They just encourage you to come. They have meetings. There are many, many commentaries written on how you can live this Rule of Benedict today. Sister Joan Chittister has several. There's one by Judith Valente, which is incredible. That would be a great one to get as well. But there are many of them. You just have to look up commentaries on the Rule of St. Benedict. There's a lot of people who have written about this and just incorporated it in their life today.
Does the Benedictine philosophy take in contemplation and action, like somewhat like the Franciscans? Is that similar?
Contemplation and action. I'm guessing they're probably very similar. I might lean on these guys here.
Yeah.
Coming from an older tradition, it's not so much contemplation and action. Benedict was very much, you set the schedule for prayer, you set the schedule for action. They bounce off of each other, but both are very much seen as not a stepping back, but a stepping in. Some of the Franciscan tradition, I don't know as well, but might be more of the contemplation is a stepping back. Ours is more of you step into community prayer. It's an active community prayer. It's an active collaboration in serving the community and outside the community. Sometimes it's just the order of events. Brother August, do you have something different you would? I don't know how to put words around it, but it's not.
Yeah. One of the things with the Benedictines, I mean, you have contemplation and action, and we have ora et labora. We have prayer and work. So it sounds similar, but our ora and labora is really designed to be done in the monastery with the people there. Benedict wanted monasteries to be centers and signs that authentic Christian community is possible in this world. That you could take people, all sorts of different people from the outside into the monastery, and they could live well together, both praying and working. And I don't know, a lot of people in their outside lives, if you spend most of your day at work, you have work relationships that aren't always the best. But in the monastery, you live with the people that you work with. And it's a constant, we're working on being at peace there, and then inviting people in with hospitality as our guest to kind of join us for a little while, and then they go back out into the world and do some of the action out there. But our aura at Labora is really meant to be done right there in the monastery for the most part.
And these Benedictines do have incredible retreat spaces, so check out their retreats.
So Mary Jo and I met at Benedictine College, and we graduated there in '86. But I was just curious, how's the enrollment at the school up in Yankton doing over the past 5-10 years or so? It seems to be strong, or?
Yeah, we're growing. Every year we've grown for what, the past 7-8 years? Every year, 7? Yeah. So that's good. I think people are seeing the value of this. It's just a strong sense of community. I know I was just reading something that we had gotten back from our accrediting body, and they just talked about how, like, they just could not get over how much everybody on our campus understood our mission, and we're living that together and just really taking care of each other. And, we have such these kids come from so many backgrounds and so many religious traditions or no tradition, and we receive them, and we just wrap them in this community. And as our president says, we love the stuffing out of them. He'll say that about every day. So that's just what we do. We just make sure that they know that they are valuable and that we will do everything we can to help them flourish.
Thank you very much. Sorry, residual cough. Thank you very much, Barb, for your talk. Catholic social teaching is often referred to as the church's best kept secret. And so I think a lot of times we don't hear about that social teaching, and much of the rule of St. Benedict seems focused on individual hospitality and living that out individually. But I think we're faced socially, culturally, and within our own church with structures of inhospitality, oppression. If you look at the vast majority of guidelines for Catholic schools on LGBTQ, they're very alienating, they're very disrespectful, even hateful, and that's our institutional church putting those out, let alone the anti-DEI movements in politics. So in terms of Benedictine spirituality, is there a different focus from transforming individual responses to transforming what the church would call structures of sin and addressing those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's every individual organization or church is kind of doing their thing. It's like there's so many differences that I see, just even within parishes, even within just the Benedictine schools, I see some differences. But I think we all just have to learn it well, and take it from there and try to do what you can to transform. I think it's upon me, now that I know all this, it's on me to do what I can to help transform. And I just think we just individually have to keep pushing and striving. Unfortunately, our church is set up in such a way that, it starts in Rome, and we don't have a lot of impact from Mount Marty on Rome, but we can impact all of Mount Marty and everybody who comes to Mount Marty.
Yeah. I think Pope Francis is modeling that in synodality, and it's very threatening for a lot of people within the church and leadership and laity, etc. But it's where the gospel is calling us and where the Spirit is leading us, and yet we see the resistance as well. So we have a lot of work to do, and thank you for your work.
Well, yeah, and I think the one piece in here that when I talked about power, what is power and what's the use of our power? What are we using our power for? Is it to keep our thumb on people, or is it to help people flourish? And I think the church needs to think about that. The Pope needs to think about that. Priests need to think about that. We all do.
So, but anyway, thank you so much for being here. We were hoping for lots more people, which is why we moved it over here. It was the end of soccer season, so all the soccer moms and dads couldn't come. And then, of course, COVID's going around again, so I had several people just let me know today that they were planning to be here, but they just I tested positive for COVID, and I said, yeah, don't come. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Remember that next event is in December. It'll be a good conversation. Cindy, you have anything else? Cindy Sauer and Mary Novacek are the co-chairs of our Catholic Social Teaching Group. So do either of you have anything you want to say? No? All right. Well, then thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Barb.
Yeah, of course. All right.